Compared to the soft, drawling local speech, my city talk, full of hard consonants which rattled like machine gun fire, sounded like a caricature. Before my performance I was forced by my farmer to drink a glass of vodka at one gulp. I stumbled over the feet which tried to trip me and barely reached the center of the room. I started my show at once, trying to avoid looking at anyone's eyes or teeth. Whenever I recited the poetry of great speed, the peasants opened their eyes wide in amazement, thinking that they were out of my mind and my fast speech was some sort of infirmity. They were entirely convulsed by the fables and rhyme stories about animals, listening to stories about a goat traveling across the world in search of the capital of Goatland, about a cat and the 7-league boots, the bull Ferdinand, Snow White, and the 7 Dwarfs, Mickey Mouse, and Pinocchio. The guests laughed, choking on their food and sputtering vodka. After the performance, I was called to one table after another to repeat some poems, and I was forced to drink new toast. When I refused, they poured the liquor down my throat. Usually I was quite drunk by the middle of the evening and hardly knew what was going on. The face around me take on the features of animals in the stories I recited, like some live illustration in children's books that I still remembered. I felt as though I was falling down deep in a well with smooth, moist walls coated with spongy moss. At the bottom of the well, instead of water, there was my warm, secure bed where I could safely sleep and forget about everything. The winter was ending. I went every day with my farmer to fetch wood from the forest. Warm moisture filled the air and swelled the woolly moss hanging from the boughs of the great tree like graying, half-frozen rabbit skins. They were soaked with water, dropping dark drops over sheets of torn bark. Small streams spilled in every direction, gambling here and driving there under swampy roots to emerge and playfully continue their erratic childlike scamper. A neighboring family had a big wedding reception for their handsome daughter. Peasants, dressed in Sunday best, danced in the barnyard, which had been swept clean and decorated for the occasion. The groom followed ancient tradition by kissing everyone on the mouth. The bride, dizzy from too many toasts, wept and laughed in terms, paying little attention to the men who pinched her buttocks and rested their hands on her breasts. When the room emptied and the guests started dancing, I rushed to the table for the meal I had earned by my performance. I sat in the darkest corner, anxious to avoid the jeers of the drunks. 2 men entered the room with their arms over each other's shoulder in a friendly hug. I knew them both. They were among the more prosperous farmers of the village. Each had several cows, a team of horses, and choice pieces of land. I slid beneath some empty barrels in the corner. The men sat on a bench by a table still loaded with food and talked slowly. They offered each other a portion of the food, and, as it was the custom, avoided each other's eyes and kept grave faces. Then one of them slowly reached into his pocket. While picking up a piece of sausage with one hand, he slid out his knife with a large pointed blade with the other. Then he plunged it with all his strength into the back of his unsuspecting companion. Without looking back, he left the room, munching the sausage with relish. The stabbed man tried to rise. He looked around with glassy eyes. When he saw me, he tried to say something, but all that came out of his mouth was a half-chewed piece of cabbage. Once more he tried to stand up, but he wobbled and slid gently between the bench and the table, making sure that there was no one else about, and trying in vain to stop trembling. I scurried out of the half-open door like a rat and ran from the barn. At dusk, village lads were grabbing girls, pulling them into the barn. On a pile of hay, a man showing his buttocks had a warm spread eagle on his back. Drunks, stumbling across the threshing yard, cursed to each other and vomited, harassing the lovers and waking the snorers. I pried off the board of the rear of the barn and squeezed through the opening. I ran to my farmer's barn and quickly scrambled into the heap of hay in the stable, which was my sleeping quarters. The body was not removed from the house immediately after the wedding. It was placed on one side of the room where the dead man's family assembled in the main room. Meanwhile, one of the elder village women had bared the left arm of the corpse and washed it with brown mixture. The men and women suffered from goiter entered the room one by one, the ugly sacks of inflated flesh hanging under their chins and spreading over their necks. The old women brought each of them to the body, made some involved gestures over the affected part, and then lifted the lifeless hand to touch the swelling 7 times. The patient, pale with fright, had to repeat with her, "Let the disease go where this hand will be going." After treatment, the patient paid the dead man's family for the cure. The corpse remained in the room. The left hand rested on his chest. A holy candle had been placed in his stiff right hand. By the 4th day, when the odor of the room had become stronger, a priest was summoned from the village and a burial preparation started. Long after the funeral, Farmer's wife was still refused to wash the bloodstains in the room of the murder. They were clearly visible on the floor and table, like a dark rust-colored fungus embedded in the wood forever. Everyone believed that these stains, testifying to the crime, would sooner or later draw the murderer back to the spot against his will and lead to his death. However, the murderer, whose face I remembered very well, frequently dined in the same room where he had murdered, gorging himself on the ample meals served there. I could not understand how he could remain unafraid of the bloodstains. I often watched him with morbid fascination as he walked over them, imperturbably, smoking his pipe or drawing a bit of pickled cucumber after a glass of vodka downed in one gulp. At some times I was tense and drawn slingshot. I awaited some shattering event, a dark chasm that would open under the bloodstains and swallow him with a trace or seizure of St. Vity's dance. But the murderer trode fearlessly over the stains. Sometimes at night I wondered if the stains had lost their power of vengeance. After all, there was somewhat fainted now. Kittens had dirtied them, and the woman herself, forgetting her resolution, had often mopped the floor. On the other hand, I knew the workings of justice were often exceedingly slow. In the village I had heard a tale of a skull which tumbled out of a grave and proceeded to roll down an incline, in between the crosses, carefully avoiding beds of blooming flowers. The sexton tried to stop the skull with his spade, but it evaded him and headed toward the cemetery gate. A forester saw it also, tried to stop it by shooting it with his rifle. The skull, quite undaunted by the obstacles, rolled steadily down the road leading to the village. It waited for the opportune moment, and then threw itself under the hoofs of the local farmers' horses. They bolted, overturned their cart, and killed the driver on the spot. When people heard about the accident, they were curious and investigated the matter further. They discovered that the skull had jumped out of the grave of the older brother of the accident victim. 10 years earlier, the older brother was about to inherit the father's property. The younger brother and his wife were obviously envious of his good fortune. Then, one night, the older brother died suddenly. His brother and sister-in-law decided on a hasty burial, not even allowing the relatives of the deceased to visit the body. Various rumors about the cause of such a sudden death circulated in the village, yet nothing definite was known. Gradually, the younger brother, who eventually took over the property, prospered in wealth and general esteem. After the accident by the cemetery gate, the skull gave up its wandering and rested quietly on a road dust. Close inspection showed that the large rusty nail had been driven deep into the bone. Thus, after many years, the victim punished the executioner and justice prevailed. So it was believed that neither rain, nor fire, nor wind could ever wipe out the stain of a crime, for justice hangs over the world like a great sledgehammer, lifted by powerful arms, which had to stop for a while before coming down with a terrible force on an unsuspecting anvil. As they used to say in the villages, even a speck of dust shows up in the sun. While the adults usually left me alone, I had to watch out for the village boys. They were great hunters. I was their game. Even my farmer warned me to keep out of their way. I took the cattle to the edge of the pasture, far away from the other boys. The grass was richer there, but one had to watch the cows constantly to keep them from straying into the adjoining fields and damaging crops. but here I was fairly safe from raids, and not too conspicuous. Every now and then some shepherds crept up on me and sprang a surprise attack. I usually got a beating and had to flee into the fields. I warned them loudly on such occasions that if the cows should damage any crops while I was away, my farmer would punish them. That threat often worked, and they would return to the cows. Still, I was afraid of such attacks and did not have a moment's peace. Every moment of the shepherds, every huddle, every sign of action towards me filled me with apprehension of some plot. Their other games and schemes centered around a military equipment found in the woods, mostly rifle cartridges and landmines, locally called soap because of their shape. To find a catch of ammunition, one had only to walk a few miles into the forest and forage in the underbrush. The weapons had been left by 2 detachments of partisans who had waged a drawn-out battle there some months earlier. Soap cakes were particularly plentiful. Some peasants said that they were left by the fleeing white partisans. Others swore that they were booty taken from the Reds, which the whites could not carry along with the other equipment. One could also find broken rifles in the forest. The boys would take out the barrels, cut them shorter sections, and fashion them into pistols with handles whittled from branches. Such pistols used rifle ammunition, which was also easily found in the bush. The cartridge was detonated by a nail attached to a band of rubber. Crude though they were, these pistols could be lethal. 2 of the village boys were seriously injured when they quarreled and shot each other with such guns. Another homemade pistol exploded in a boy's hand, tearing off his fingers and an ear. Most pathetic was the paralyzed and crippled son of one of our neighbors. Someone played a practical joke on him by placing several rounds of rifle ammunition at the bottom of his Comet. When the unsuspecting boy lit his Comet in the morning and swung it between his legs, the cartridges went off. There was also the power-up, the method of shooting. One took from the bullet from the cartridge case and poured out some of the powder. The bullet was then pressed down into a half-empty case. The rest of the powder was placed on top, covering the bullet.